Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the latest episode of If Data Could Talk, and I am your host, Andy Cotgreave, technical evangelist at Tableau. Thanks for joining us. Today, I have the wonderful Jason Forrest joining us on the show. Now, today we're going to be talking about emotions and data. Right now in Europe, we've got a second wave of the disease, and I'm not going to lie, it's pretty stressful over here right now. Emotions across the country are volatile, and we're facing another winter of uncertainty and disruption. But earlier this year, Jason and his team published the Emotion Archive, and this is a data-driven project exploring how people were reacting to the first wave of COVID-19 as it spread across the world. So we're going to dig into the how, the what, the why, and importantly, I think for me, how the results were slightly more optimistic than Jason maybe had predicted at the start of the project. So with that, let's meet Jason. Welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, well, I am delighted to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. So Jason Forrest, I currently work, my title is I am the Director of Interactives for the COVID Response Center at McKinsey. I do quite a lot in the data viz community at the moment. I am the editor-in-chief of Nightingale, the journal of the Data Visualization Society. I've been an early member there and a very active member of that community. I think if you're part of it, you probably have seen me ping or even had a chat with me. I'm all over Twitter as well, but most importantly, I really only I fell deeply in love with data visualization history just about 4 years ago now, and have done a lot of writing, hence my relationship with helping to found Nightingale, but really trying to source these practitioners from the past to help tell their stories, and to be honest with you, just to kind of bring some new life into what I see in data visualization and take inspiration from their work.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's been great seeing you sort of develop and emerge on the scene over the last few years, Jason. So thanks for everything you've been doing to help people. And as a fellow data viz history nerd, I love seeing that stuff particularly. But we're going to talk about the Emotion Project, which is part of your work with McKinsey. Before we get into that, just quickly, for those that don't know, tell us a little bit about McKinsey as an organization.
Yeah, sure. McKinsey, a business consultancy, started in 1922. Currently have work in over 70 countries around the world, so rather large organization as far as business consultants go. We've had a really interesting history. We've done everything from helping to develop the UPC code towards actually even helping to halt the spread of polio in Nigeria. It's a fantastic organization of experts that is just, you never seem to find the bottom of. Personally speaking, I got involved with the COVID Response Center right after a few weeks of staring out the window, trying to figure out what the heck was going on in the world at the end of March, early April. The COVID Response Center is kind of a different way that the firm is experimenting with sharing our experience directly to people. And one of the big areas of focus is in data visualization. And we predominantly really focus in what we call saving lives and saving livelihoods. So a real focus on healthcare and economic data.
Yeah, I think it's great to have to realize there's a purpose to data visualization. We just need to do data visualization because that's what people do these days. It's like, well, great, but why? So I like that. So from that mission, I guess the Emotion Archive felt like a really good natural step. So let's dive into that and tell us, what is the project? What was its sort of genesis? And then we'll get into what happened as things developed on the project.
Yeah, like I said, there's so many amazing experts around the firm, and kind of getting tapped into them. There's different ways that we share our expertise. One of the projects that we saw kind of emerge is called The New Possible. It's an ethnographic research project, which basically collects kind of more diary entries from 122 people in 8 countries and 22 cities around the world. It was a project that really tried to ask more ambiguous questions, not lead people. Just say things like, how do you feel today? Tell us about how the pandemic has affected your personal finances. One of the great questions is, show us something that's become meaningful in your life since the pandemic. Sometimes that was one of the examples that I recall was a picture of a fire pit. And because this person in Australia, that had become the center place for his kind of family activity at the end of the day. So it was a very open-ended approach towards basically having people just talk about how disrupted their lives were and what was going on. This was conducted at the end of April, early May. And as it started to evolve, I was like, I think there's a hell of a story in here. And so we kind of like cozied up to them and said, hey, what do you think about doing something a little bit more experimental in data visualization? And what was fascinating is that everybody, all the partners involved, all the researchers involved, all the people that went out and collected the data were just like, yes, how do we make this happen? What can we do to help?
So just to clarify that, at the start, this wasn't a data visualization project in its first genesis, and even I guess were they even collecting data as a data set at this point?
Well, that's the thing that's so fascinating, actually, because it essentially started off as roughly 800 video clips, and that was kind of segmented into a little less than 1,000 like kind of translations and kind of text comments. And what was interesting is that they just had this giant mass of stuff. And they were just like, well, what do we do with it? Like they had been using it to basically synthesize into a series of kind of articles that talked about, the big trends that were happening across these populations around the world. What we did is we came in, wanted to really pull in a lot of influence from Georgia Lupi and the whole concept of data humanism to say, like, how can we let this data speak for itself? Like, how can we get to the emotions that are underneath the wild quantity of feelings that we all have during the pandemic? And what was really interesting is that, you're right, we had to then go back and rebuild our data set, right? Because, so how it really starts is with Robert Plutchik's Wheel of Emotion, which basically breaks emotions into these different categories. It's kind of connected to color. And so as we started to navigate the comments, the emotions, we then had to kind of break that apart a little bit and focus only on kind of like more tertiary emotions rather than the most intense. Things like revulsion are not really something that come up very much, or I mean, even anger was actually one of the least kind of quantified emotions. But then we had to go through a multi-step process of editing the content, anonymizing the content, mapping it all. We first tried some kind of like text sentiment analysis. That didn't necessarily work, so we went through and manually did it. We broke that across multiple people. We then validated that with multiple people. So, if anyone's ever done a data humanism project, really the building of the data set is actually such a big part of what that whole process is. So it was fascinating.
I'm really intrigued because sometimes building data sets is, it's a fact of life for a lot of people, watching, and it doesn't all just get automatically fed into a database, right? So you were going through manually, there was a team of you manually converting these things into some sort of metrics and measures. And did you get down the end of the journey and then think, oh, if only we'd gone back and collected that and have to go back again at all? Or did you kind of do it once through?
Oh, I'd love to say that we just did it once. I mean, I personally went through and reviewed every comment 3 times, right? And
wow.
that was spread around maybe 4 or 5 people. There was we even had at the very last mile, we had a last round of revisions where we needed to actually go through and pull out any brand names. Talking about major online video platforms, for example, wasn't actually something that we really felt comfortable with putting kind of company names behind things. So like, when you never do it before, you make mistakes. But what was fascinating is that, honestly, I wouldn't have done it any other way, because it's really in reading every comment and making those mappings yourself that you really get to the data, right? And, we have in all of our books, like, understand your data set. What was fascinating for this is that this was understanding people's stories, right? Like, and there in our data set, there was actually a lot more images and video than we really could present in the interactive. But, there are really amazing, there's this one photo that I always kind of pause on that you know, as a woman in China doing her exercises for the day with her baby daughter draped over her shoulders while she's trying to go through her exercises. You know, like there's so much data in that image, in that, even in that mental image, how we get on with our lives, that it really helped us to connect with the subject matter. And even though we never met these people, I mean, we really care about them.
So I wrote a note down in answering your first question. I wrote survey ? Right? Because essentially what you described was, well, we did a survey, right? And you could have gone out and surveyed people in your emotions and said, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you feeling revulsion, anger, happiness, optimism, pessimism? And that would have been great, right? But what you've actually described is, you know, sometimes the emotion, sometimes the data set can only be gathered if you really are in there feeling the sense that those people are feeling. I guess that's something you've learned from this. I'm trying to think, is there a general lesson that people could learn from that, if in similar projects or non-similar projects, right?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, the one thing that comes to mind immediately is the challenges we found with kind of data science techniques in harvesting and automating like the mapping of these emotions. And we actually have a meetup coming soon where our data science will actually talk about how the processes, we didn't have enough corpus, so to speak, to go through and really use the technology to help us get one step further. What happened, though, is that in learning about the data and understanding and empathizing with the data, we really tried to tell the story of these people, right? And it's that interesting intersection between, here are the people telling you their story, and here's the data visualization of creating a system for the data. And it's that intersection which has actually become the thing that we've been very fascinated with, and I think has really resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think so. For those that haven't gone to see the page yet, and obviously I recommend you all go and check it out. It's not so much a data visualization of 50% of people were really optimistic. It's, here's the data organized and categorized in a really powerful visual way, but it's really to then encourage people to dive into it, right? And that was the goal.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think the next thing to maybe chat about really quickly is that the storytelling process, right? Like there's been a lot of articles, data storytelling. Is it storytelling? Is it not storytelling? And I think what we realized is that, you know, to tell the story, you have to frame the context. What the heck are we looking at? And then what we do is we basically show, here's the quantification of all emotions. So we actually boil them down into 16 emotions. We show that basically things like anticipation and acceptance were amongst our kind of most common emotions that were identified. Things like disgust and anger among the least. So already a surprise in what we had anticipated. Then we go through and show the breakdown with a nice bubble chart per country. You can then scroll over them. Each of the bubbles also has their subject matters that they're tied to. We were able to apply some data viz processes that kind of extracted the major nouns. So things like people or child or home, those themes become tagged to this. Then, instead of jumping into the actual main data visualization, it was really important for us to actually have a series of very short videos of these people around the world telling their stories. And they're even like just a few seconds of each of them speaking, but having their face, you know, like I think of the very first video, the woman pans away to show her kids and then talks about the fact that her parents live across town and that she hasn't seen them in weeks, you know? I mean, we have so many experiences of a woman talking about how she was about to get her degree in nursing and she wasn't able to complete her degree. I mean, these are stories that we can all resonate with, and it was really important for us to have the people talk first. Then it goes into a very fancy data visualization, effectively a huge kind of swarm of all these multicolored dots, each dot representing a comment with a 1 to 3 emotions tagged to them. Some of them have little play buttons. Those have actually a video where the people can speak for themselves. We also needed to and chose to translate and transcribe every video. Because it was such an inclusive project, we really wanted to make sure that it was accessible as possible. And then the coolest thing, and the thing I have to say that even as a data visualization practitioner, every time I play with it, I'm still like, how do we make this happen? It then transforms from this B swarm to a Euler diagram, and mathematically makes these cool circles, which then groups all these comments by theme. So it's an amazing team that did the work. I'm only just the figurehead of it for today. But
well, thank you for the thank you to you and the team. And now I guess your expectations changed. I mean, I think you've slightly touched on this. You thought you came out seeing a lot more optimism and happiness in the data, right? And that was how the data confounded your expectations a bit. What do you think causes that?
So this is where I gaze off into the distance and, and speak philosophically. So, I think the thing that's interesting is that because COVID is a pandemic that has affected almost every country in the world, it's actually proven to be a very similar challenge that many of us have had to react to. So having lockdowns, having certain supply chains disrupted, having the inability to see family, having this totally new work paradigm just kind of happen overnight where we probably were not expecting it or ready for it. That's actually, people have responded so similarly, so like seeing comments about people's live-work situations in Singapore matching exactly to what's happening in England. Finding people's reactions about their personal finances from India to Chicago mapping almost identically. And it's fascinating. And I think that the real reason why is because everybody had to take a moment and think, what's important to me? Does it make sense that I'm commuting an hour and a half a day to work?
Yeah.
There's one gentleman that speaks about that he was lobbying to work from home more regularly. And now he works only at home, and he realized that it's allowed him to fundamentally change his relationship with his kids. Like these are the subjects that so many people identify with, and it's understanding that we're all trying to get to what's important mentally with our physical health. People's interest in cooking obviously exploded. People's interest in researching and learning exploded. People exploring their spiritual lives. Like I think it's this really, despite all of the hardships that we've endured collectively, seeing this as an opportunity for all of us to kind of reevaluate what's important in our lives.
Yeah.
Is, I think, the thing that's just really special.
And I think one of the things I really like about the project is that that there was the deluge of data, and the pandemic's been a marvelous moment for the world of data and data visualization. Obviously, a terrible global moment, but it's brought the data to the fore because people wanted the data. But having that disaggregation and having that access to the underlying aspect has been really important too. And you talked about data humanism from Georgia Lupi. We'll try and get the link to that below in the comments because they're really good reads. So what happened when it was released? It was released to the world, and you thought, phew, it's released, I can go and have a nice cold beer. And then what happened on what was the response?
It's been amazing. It's one of those things where it's like so big that it's hard for me to really understand it. Like internally at McKinsey, because it's in quite a number of people globally. It's turned a lot of heads. People have been, I can't tell you how many times people said we can do this. I didn't even know this was even a thing. I think that we're so used to seeing data visualization in these very bite-sized moments where we're like, is this bigger or smaller than last week? These dashboards, and that's such a huge, and all those kind of dashboarding techniques, hugely important, big part of my work. But it's really providing somebody a different view that will potentially inspire them and just give them pause, which is why we would kind of leverage a slow data viz project like this. For me, doing a lot of work in COVID data and economic data, I'm always just trying to say like, okay, well, great. If you want to talk about county level US unemployment per industry, I can give you that data. But if you want to talk about like how someone feels, like that's also important too.
Yeah.
And the real takeaway I have with this is that, people matter. like our whole selves matter in the new working paradigm. If you're unhappy, if your mental well-being is not supported, that's a net a negative, right? Like, we matter, and we need to focus and consider who we are as people if we're going to kind of work in this new way.
Yeah, absolutely. You used a great term there, slow data viz. I think, we've got slow cooking. There's lots of slow concepts around, but again, whether it's about the human aspect of COVID data or whatever your business data is, if you take a different perspective and approach to looking at data, you will learn something about your organization or whatever the data is talking about. So I really like that concept. So so here we are. It's now what month is it? It's nearly October. We're going into another winter. Certainly in Europe, we're heading into the second wave. What do you think what do you think the next wave of data and COVID-19 might be?
So what's interesting is that, this data was collected very early in the pandemic. We didn't know, everybody was like anxious to get it over with. I think we've all been like, okay, well, it'll be done by next month. It'll be done. Oh, okay, 2 weeks, restaurants are going to open up, back to work. It's not going to do that. So on this project, that's why we really framed it as the emotion archive. I think even just, cataloging and archiving the concepts that happen at the beginning are important. Clearly, the story continues to develop. I'm actually, and the team is actually starting to really focus on the next big projects, predominantly in vaccinations, also in, we have a lot of new economic work that we're trying to pull in that shows where people are having a hard time paying their bills. Exactly what parts of the population are vulnerable to workplace displacement. So I feel like, we're really just not done as a global community in COVID, but also as data visualization practitioners to tell that story. I feel like we had a surprise hit at the beginning, but like, we're not done bringing the human side of the evolution of the pandemic to people to help them to understand and to give shape to it. So
yeah. Well, I think it's obviously we're all living through it, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. But really looking forward to seeing what you and the team come up with next. So Jason, thanks a lot for answering the questions. Everybody watching, just do go check it out. Give yourself half an hour at least to just enjoy hearing some of the stories. It's a really interesting thing to look at and experience. So thanks. And now with that, we'll head on to our next section. All right, Jason. In this section, we'd like to hear about what our guests have been reading, watching, or listening. And we normally say to our guests, just come up with one thing, but you've over-delivered and you've got something you've read, watched, and listened to. So we're going to hear all three of your things in a moment. The thing I've read this week, which I really enjoyed, is Wait But Why, which is Jason Urban. What's his first name? Is it Jason Urban? Waitbutwhy.com. He's just published a post called The Big and the Small, and it's a visual description about the scale of the universe, from the biggest stars and the biggest superclusters down to the smallest atoms. Now, we've all seen videos and animations and things like that over time, and they're always fascinating, but the way he describes it, he gets your brain to do these mental leaps every 5 seconds. Imagine it's this big now. Imagine it's that small. And it was just amazing. And the thing I took away, what's the quote? It said, there was one line saying, if an atom was the size of a football stadium, no, what was it? If an atom was the size of a football stadium, the protons would still be invisible. They'd be so small, they still wouldn't be invisible. I'm like, what? That can't be right. That can't be right. Anyway, so that just blew my mind. My mind melts when I think about universal scales. So Wait But Why, check that one out. All right, Jason. So now the floor is yours. What have we got?
Oh, really? Well, so I am addicted to books. If you follow my Twitter feed, you'll see that they come very regularly. And I've actually been, and the other thing is that, one of the joys for me, not only to find these books or even learn about these books, is to read them. It's enriched my practice immeasurably. And the one that I want to share is a super rare book called Pictographs and Graphs by Rudolf Modley. Modley was probably the greatest, created more isotypes and pictograms than almost anybody else. Had a large team in America, followed the kind of Otto and Marie Neurath isotype concepts. And this was a book that he wrote to basically teach people how to build these kinds of statistical graphics. And what's fascinating in the story of the isotype is that it wasn't really taught very well. They didn't do a very good job of making sure that other people understood exactly how to create these things. And so what I'm finding is that, just in doing the research and finding the books, it's all there. It just needs to be kind of shared again. So,
yeah. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's wonderful stuff. I love it. I can send you some scans if you want to.
Yeah, that would be really good. The history of the field is absolutely amazing. And when you know this too, but when you start digging into the archive of books and you read these things, you realize there's nothing new. Nothing was coming. It's all been invented before. People have been trying to bang on about appropriate data visualization for at least 120 years. And then we keep discovering more and more voices of people, more and more diverse background of people who, have been trying to do this for all this time. So yeah, we'll share that link. Yeah, nice one.
So
what year is that book from?
I've got to share one last little bit. So they also did the whole thing about newspapers, making these isotypes in newspapers. And in this book, he explains this whole series of what he called telefacts, which we would kind of see now as like infographics as we see in newspapers. But they created RJ Andrews and myself, we've found, I'd say about 2,000 of them. Right, like there's so many. I've personally archived like 12 or 1,300. It's a deluge of content, and honestly, I'd never read about it before coming across this book. So it's really it's a fascinating story that's kind of waiting still really to be developed.
Yeah. And what year was that book?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. 1 second. 37. Oh no, I take it back. 52. Excuse me.
52. All right. Okay.
There's one that came out in 37, and then he kind of elaborated on in 52. So.
All right. Okay. Now, I know it would be very easy for you and I just to pivot and talk about the history of dataviz for about 16 hours. So what was the next thing on your list?
I love sci-fi. I know it's a popular thing in our peer group. I think that the new Surrounded by Wolves show on HBO is actually quite good. It's kind of like it feels like it's kind of in the Alien mythos, and there's lots of androids kind of burping up white blood stuff. I found it quite interesting. And then I have another show that my whole family totally binged, which is kind of connected, and it's a survivalist reality show called Alone, where they took these 10 people and put them in the Arctic Circle, and it's fascinating to see all the different things that can go wrong, and how if you're trying to survive from nothing, like how you have to think about survival differently. Like it's not just about only having all the meat you can eat, but you need to find areas of fat and salt and things like that. So it's totally fascinating.
Oh, awesome. I've not come across either of those, but I'm a sci-fi nut too, so I'll check that one out. So I'm listening. Yes, the last sense we wanted to touch.
So I think I said this in my intro, but I actually was a fairly well-known electronic musician before my new life in data visualization, and have released, 12, 13 albums and had record labels and really had a whole career in electronic music. One of the kind of groups that I feel like I helped to slightly influence, who have now eclipsed what I would ever do, is a guy named A.G. Cook, and represents a group called PC Music, which is effectively a very loose grouping of kind of electronic music weirdos that are really into pop music. And out of the blue, he released a 7-album hard drive called 7G, which spans everything from very weird bleep blop kind of synth explorations to these very glossy kind of guitar pop songs, and literally everything in between. It's like having a hard drive, like running it through a blender and kind of hearing what the results sound like. And I just love it. He's amazing.
Oh, that sounds great. And so everybody listening, next time you're in a creative mode of creating a visualization or some poster, then listen to some of that. Even Jason's your music is great. I have enjoyed your music too, Jason. Fantastic stuff. Yeah. So if you haven't got enough to read, watch, or listen to after that one, well, you'll have to tune in to the next episode where another guest might only share one thing. So, Jason, that about concludes our time. Thanks for the conversation. Really well done on the project. It's great learning about the background and the impact it's had. Thanks for sharing the things you've been reading, watching, and listening to too. Let us know if you're watching this, what you thought of those things, or if you've already seen or watched them. And to everybody watching, we've got links and resources below. Don't forget Tableau Conference, virtual Tableau Conference-ish, is coming up in the second week of October. Do go register. We've got really good guests, loads of amazing content. You're going to learn lots of things. We've got some great, crazy stuff planned. I'll be hosting IronViz. Very excited about that. And with that is the end of our time today. So, Jason, thank you very much again, and we will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.